They told the story like a warning, the way old men talk when the lantern oil is low and the night has too much space in it. "Don't speak his name," old Cyrus would whisper, eyes fixed on the dark beyond the cabin door. "Names are doors, and some doors shouldn't open." But on the Harrowick Plantation, names were spoken anyway, spat out like curses, laughed at like jokes, or breathed in secret like prayers. They called him Elias Kofi. Not because it was truly his name, no one in chains was allowed to keep all of what belonged to them, but because it was close enough to hurt and close enough to remember. The masters said he was a witch. The overseer said he was a devil. The field hand said he was something else, entirely something older than the house on the hill. Older than the chapel bells that rang every Sunday, like they were trying to drown out a guilty conscience. They said Elias didn't curse people. They said he revealed what was already waiting. Harrowick sat in South Carolina, a wide stretch of stolen land cut into tidy violence. Cotton rose like pale ribs, oak trees draped in Spanish moss like funeral veils, and a white plantation house that gleamed in the sun as if light itself was obligated to serve it. At the edge of the property stood a chapel, small and severe. It wasn't built for faith, it was built for control. The Reverend would come twice a month from the nearest town, Reverend Amos Caldwell, a narrow man with thin lips and a Bible held like a weapon, and he would preach obedience as if God himself had written the whip. Behind the chapel, hidden by cypress and shadow, sat the old burial ground. No headstones, no names carved, just earth that wouldn't grow grass right. And in that direction, always in that direction, the wind seemed to move differently, like it was careful not to disturb something sleeping. Elias arrived on Harrowick in late autumn, when the air tasted of smoke and rotting leaves. They brought him in a wagon, wrists bound, ankles swollen. The auction men called him Strong Stock. The mistress, Margaret Harrowick, pale as milk and twice as cold, stood on the porch and watched with the same expression she gave the weather. The master, Silas Harrowick, didn't come out. Silas rarely showed himself unless it was to be admired. Instead, the overseer, Jedediah Pike, walked down with a ledger and that lazy smile men wore when they believed the world was theirs by right. Jedediah squinted at Elias as if judging a mule. "You there," he said. "You got a skill?" Elias didn't answer. Jedediah's smile flattened. "I asked you a question, boy." The field hands watched from a distance. They knew what happened when questions went unanswered. Elias lifted his head slowly. His eyes weren't wild. They weren't pleading. They were quiet. And that quiet, unsettled Jedediah more than defiance ever could. "I have memory," Elias said finally, his voice steady, accented in a way the plantation tongues couldn't place, "and hands that can help." Jedediah scoffed. "We don't need your memory. We need your back." He turned to the driver. "Put him with the quarters. If he causes trouble, I'll split him open and let the crows learn his insides." That was how Harrowick welcomed him, with a threat spoken like routine. That night, in the slave quarters, the air was thick with damp breath and old sorrow. A woman named Lottie May, a cook with tired eyes, pressed a tin cup of water into Elias's hands. "You eat?" she asked. Elias shook his head. "You pray?" she asked, softer. He looked past her, toward the direction of the chapel. "I listen," he said. Lottie May frowned. "Listen to what?" Elias didn't answer right away. He leaned forward, as if hearing something the rest of them couldn't. "Something under the boards," he said at last. "Something that thinks it is trapped." A young man nearby, Caleb Bryce, barely 20, skin still trying to decide whether life would harden him or break him, let out a nervous laugh. "Ain't nothing under the boards but rats," Caleb said. Elias's gaze slid to him like a blade laid gently against skin. "Rats don't whisper names," he said. The cabin went quiet. It wasn't superstition that filled the room. It was recognition, like someone had spoken aloud, a truth they'd been pretending not to know. Because Harrowick had always whispered. Long before Elias arrived, strange things happened on that land. A bell in the chapel would ring once at midnight with no rope pulled. A field hand would wake to find handprints on the inside of the window glass, as if someone had been trying to get out. And every so often, someone would disappear, not run away, not sold, not dead. Just gone. They blamed swamps. They blamed wolves. They blamed weakness. But the elders in the quarters blamed Harrowick itself. They said the plantation was built on something it shouldn't have been. They said the Harrowicks didn't just own people. They owed something. Elias learned quickly where he stood in that invisible economy of cruelty. By day he worked the fields like the rest, hands blistering, shoulders burning, cotton scratching his skin raw. He didn't complain. He didn't beg. He watched. He watched the way the master's house cast a shadow that seemed to reach too far. He watched the way Margaret Harrowick never stepped near the burial ground, not even by accident. He watched Jedediah Pike's boots, how they always stopped at a certain line in the dirt near the chapel, like even he had a boundary. And he watched the chapel itself. On Sundays, they marched the enslaved people inside in neat rows. Reverend Caldwell stood at the front, sweating through his collar, voice booming. "Servants," he preached, "obey your masters, for such is the will of the Lord." Silas Harrowick sat in the front pew, hands folded, a polite smile on his face like he was hearing praise intended for him. Elias sat in the back. The chapel smelled of old pine and damp hymnals. The windows were narrow slits, letting in pale light like a confession reluctant to be made. As the Reverend spoke, Elias's attention drifted not to the pulpit, but to the floor. There were boards beneath the pews that didn't match the others. Newer boards, placed carefully, as if covering something. When the sermon ended, the congregation filed out. Silas and Margaret left first, their footsteps clean, their lives untouched. Jedediah lingered, watching the field hands shuffle away. Elias stayed seated. Lottie Mae tugged his sleeve. "Come on," she whispered. "Don't be lingering. That man don't like lingering." Elias didn't move. His eyes remained fixed on those mismatched boards. "What is there?" he murmured. Lottie Mae swallowed. "Ain't your business." Caleb leaned in, trying to sound brave. "Just old repairs," he said. "Don't go poking at things you can't fix." Elias's voice lowered until it was almost nothing. "It is not repaired," he said. "It is sealed." Jedediah Pike's shadow fell across the aisle. "You got a hearing problem?" the overseer asked, smiling without warmth. "Or, you planning to start praying extra hard?" Elias looked up slowly. "I was listening," he said again. Jedediah's grin twitched. "Listen to what, boy?" Elias's eyes flicked once down to the boards, then back to Jedediah. "Your house," Elias said softly, "is not empty." The chapel went still. Jedediah Pike's smile vanished. For a moment, something like fear crossed his face, quick and shameful, like a man catching himself believing in God. Then anger took its place. Jedediah grabbed Elias by the collar and yanked him up so hard his feet stumbled over the pew. "You think you're funny?" Jedediah hissed. "You think you can spook folks with mumbo-jumbo?" Elias didn't resist, but he didn't soften either. He stared at Jedediah like he was looking through him, past him, into something rotten and private. Then Elias said the sentence that would change Harrowick forever. "You will hear it tonight," he whispered, "because it is done being quiet." Jedediah shoved him toward the door. "Get out. And if I hear one more word, one more about ghosts or curses, I'll have you hanging from the chapel beam." Elias stumbled out into the daylight. But as he stepped off the chapel porch, the wind shifted. And from somewhere beneath those sealed boards, deep enough that no human voice should reach there, came a sound. Not a scream. Not a whisper. A single heavy knock, like something inside the earth had turned over and remembered the way out. That night, Harrowick Plantation held its breath. The cabins in the quarters went quiet earlier than usual, not because people were tired, but because even exhaustion didn't feel safe. The sky was a hard, starless black, the kind that made the trees look like claws. Somewhere out in the cotton fields, crickets chirped like nervous liars, and the wind slid through the Spanish moss with the slow patience of a hand dragging across a coffin lid. Elias Kofi sat on the edge of his bunk, back straight, eyes half-lidded. He wasn't sleeping. He wasn't praying. He was doing what he had said he did best. Listening. Lottie Mae moved around the cabin like a ghost trying not to be seen. She set a small bundle of herbs and twine near Elias's feet, without speaking. She didn't look at him directly. "You don't want me doing this," she finally murmured. Elias glanced down at the bundle, then back up to her face. "You brought it anyway." Lottie Mae's jaw tightened. "I brought it because I've seen what this place does to folks, and I ain't letting it do more." Caleb Bryce hovered near the door, peeking through the cracks in the wood, as though he expected the dark to grow teeth. "That knock," he whispered, voice barely there. "You heard it too, right? That weren't in my head?" Old Cyrus lay on his pallet, staring at the ceiling like he was watching a memory play on the boards. "Boy," he rasped, "everything here is in your head. That's how it gets you. That's how it stays." Elias's gaze drifted toward the direction of the chapel beyond the cabins, beyond the line of trees, past the slope where the grass refused to grow right. "It is not in the head," Elias said. "It is in the ground." Outside, a distant bell rang once. Not the chapel bell. A smaller sound, metal on metal, like someone tapping a spoon against iron. A signal. Caleb stiffened. "That's the signal for the night patrol." Elias stood. Lottie Mae grabbed his sleeve. "Don't be foolish. Ain't nothing good out there after dark." Elias gently freed his arm. "Something is already out there," he said, "and it has been calling longer than you have been alive." Old Cyrus's eyes narrowed. "Where you going?" "To where the boards are wrong," Elias replied. Caleb's throat bobbed. "You're going to the chapel?" Elias looked at him once sharp and calm. "If you are afraid, stay." Caleb opened his mouth like he wanted to prove he wasn't afraid. But his body betrayed him. His feet did not move. So Elias stepped out alone. The night air hit like cold water. It smelled of wet earth and smoke. Harrowick's main house sat on the hill like a pale beast, windows dark, a few lamps lit inside like eyes half open. Elias could see silhouettes moving behind curtains watching. Not sleeping. Listening. As he walked, the sound of his footsteps seemed too loud on the dirt. Each step felt like a dare. The chapel came into view, small and rigid beneath the oaks. The white paint looked gray at night, as if even the moon didn't want to touch it. The door was shut, but Elias noticed what no one else would in daylight. The doorframe was scratched long, curved marks, like nails dragged across wood from the inside. Elias stopped at the porch steps. He placed his palm on the door. It was cold. Not cold like night air. Cold like stone in a graveyard. He closed his eyes and listened, and for a moment, the world seemed to tilt. The crickets faded. The wind pulled back. Even the distant hush of the swamp went still, like nature itself had stepped away from this place. Then, from below, knock. One heavy thud beneath the boards. Elias' fingers tightened. "Who is there?" he whispered, not to tempt it, but to name it. A long silence followed. Then another knock. Two this time. Slow, deliberate. Like an answer given by something that had forgotten language but remembered rhythm. Elias stepped down from the porch and moved around the side of the chapel. He knew there would be a small crawlspace access, most structures had one, but he didn't find a door. he found something else. A patch of earth that looked disturbed, like it had been dug and filled again. The grass there was thinner, sickly. The ground smelled sharper. Blood didn't wash out of soil easily. Elias knelt and pressed his ear close. From beneath the earth, a whisper rose so faint it could have been imagination, except it carried a shape. A word. A name. Not his. Not Lottie May's. Not Caleb's. It said, Silas. Elias's spine stiffened. Because that meant the thing beneath the chapel wasn't calling for freedom. It was calling for the master. A twig snapped behind him. Elias stood slowly without turning. He could smell tobacco and sweat before he heard the breath. Yedidiach Pike. You got a death wish? Jedediah's voice was low, tight, like a rope pulled too hard. Elias turned to face him. The overseer held a lantern in one hand and a pistol in the other. The lantern light carved Jedediah's face into harsh shapes, anger, fear, something uglier beneath both. I told you, Jedediah hissed. No more talk of ghosts. Elias's eyes drifted to the pistol, then back to Jedediah's face. You came because you heard it. Jedediah's jaw clenched. I came because I saw you sneaking, and because Master Silas don't like... Knock. The ground beneath them thudded so hard, the lantern flame shook. Jedediah flinched. He tried to hide it, but Elias saw the truth. Jedediah Pike was afraid of something under that chapel. Elias spoke softly. You did not seal it for God. You sealed it for yourselves. Jedediah's hand trembled around the pistol. Shut your mouth. The earth knocked again 3 times, rapid, like impatient fingers. And then, for the first time, something else happened. A sound rose from the chapel itself, not from beneath, from inside. A dragging noise wood scraped against wood, as if a heavy pew was being pulled slowly across the floor. Yedidiah's eyes widened. No, he whispered without meaning to. Elias's gaze snapped to the chapel door. The latch began to rattle. Not violently, patiently, like someone testing it, again and again, learning. Jedediah took a step back. This ain't real. Elias didn't move. It is real, he said, and it is waking. The door shuddered once, then twice. Then the knob turned. Jedediah's breath came fast. He raised the pistol, aiming at the door as if lead could kill a memory. Elias watched him. You cannot shoot what you buried, he murmured. The latch clicked. The door opened a crack. Darkness spilled out thicker than night, like ink poured from a wound. And from within that crack came a smell. Not rot. Not mold. Something older. The sour stink of panic trapped in wood for years. Jedediah fired. The shot cracked through the night, loud enough to wake the house on the hill. The lantern swung wildly, throwing shadows across the chapel walls like running men. The bullet didn't hit flesh. It hit nothing. Because the darkness behind the door wasn't empty. It was full. Full of movement without shape. Full of breath without lungs. Full of a presence that pressed forward like a crowd trying to push through a narrow doorway. Jedediah stumbled back, nearly dropping the lantern. Elias didn't run. He raised his hand, not as a spell, not as a threat, but as if greeting something he recognized. And the darkness paused. Just for a second. Like it was listening too. Then a voice came from inside the chapel, raw, scraped, wrong. A human voice that had been stretched thin by screaming. It whispered, "Open it, all the way." Jedediah's face drained of color. He shook his head hard, like shaking could throw the words out of his ears. Elias turned his eyes slowly toward the hill, toward the dark windows of the Harrowick house. "They will hear it now," Elias said quietly. "The truth does not stay buried forever." In the distance, the plantation house lights brightened lamps hurriedly lit, footsteps pounding, A door thrown open. Someone shouted Silas Harrowick's name. And beneath the chapel, the earth answered with a final, deep knock. Not like a request, but like a verdict. The shot woke Harrowick like a scream in a dead man's mouth. Lights flared across the plantation house, one by one, as if fear were moving room to room. Footsteps thundered down the porch steps. Voices rose sharp, confused, already defensive. "Jedediah," someone shouted. "What in God's name?" Elias stood still beside the chapel, his hand lowered now, his breath slow. He felt it the shift. The thing beneath the boards was no longer testing the world. It had been heard. That was enough to change everything. Jedediah Pike backed away from the chapel door, nearly tripping over his own boots. The pistol hung useless in his hand, smoke curling from the barrel like it was ashamed of itself. "You didn't do this," Jedediah muttered, more to himself than to Elias. "You couldn't have." Elias turned his head slightly. "I did not wake it," he said. "You did, when you buried it alive." The chapel door creaked again, not opening further, not closing, just moving, restless. Inside, the darkness shifted like a body adjusting its weight. Jedediah's face twisted. "It was necessary," he snapped. "You don't know what it was like back then." Elias's eyes sharpened. "Then tell me." Jedediah laughed once, brittle and wrong. "Tell you? You think I want to remember?" The footsteps from the house grew louder. Silas Harrowick himself emerged from the shadows, coat thrown over his nightshirt, hair disheveled in a way no one was meant to see. Margaret followed a step behind him, one hand clutched tight at her throat, like she was holding something in. Silas stopped short when he saw the chapel door ajar. His face went white. Not pale, emptied. "What have you done?" Silas whispered. Jedediah turned toward him like a drowning man spotting shore. "Master, I swear he was snooping, talking about curses, then the ground." Silas raised a hand. The sound beneath the chapel answered. Not a knock this time. A scrape. Lum. Slow. Like fingernails being dragged across wood from below, learning the grain. Silas Harrowick staggered back a step. "It can't be," he breathed. "We sealed it. We prayed." Elias finally spoke directly to him. "You prayed too late." Margaret's eyes locked on Elias, sharp and calculating even through her fear. "You," she said. "You brought this." Elias met her gaze without flinching. "I named it," he replied. "That is not the same thing." The sound inside the chapel shifted again. A low moan followed, not loud, not dramatic, but exhausted. The sound of something that had screamed itself hoarse years ago and was only now finding its voice again. Caleb Bryce stood at the edge of the clearing, half hidden by trees. He hadn't meant to follow. His legs had moved without asking him. Lottie Mae clutched his arm, her nails digging into his skin as she stared at the chapel with wet eyes. "That sound," she whispered. "That sounds like—" She couldn't finish. Old Cyrus stepped forward from the darkness, cane tapping once against the dirt. "It is," he said quietly. "That's Thomas Reed." Silas's head snapped toward him. "You keep your mouth shut." Cyrus didn't stop. "He begged you," the old man said. "Begged you not to put him down there." Margaret hissed. "He attacked a white woman." "That woman lied," Cyrus replied. "And you knew it." The air went tight. The chapel door shuddered violently now, as if something inside had heard its name and didn't like the way it was spoken. Elias closed his eyes briefly, the way a man does before stepping into cold water. When he opened them, his voice carried not loud, but steady enough to cut through panic. "You built the chapel to hide him," Elias said, "not to honor God. You told yourselves it was justice, but you did not kill him." Silas's lips trembled. "We had no choice." "You always think that," Elias replied, "right up until the earth remembers." The darkness inside the chapel surged forward, filling the doorway like a held breath. For a moment, shapes flickered within it, suggestions of arms, of shoulders, of a man pressed into too small a space. Caleb felt bile rise in his throat. He's been alive all this time? Elias shook his head slowly. Alive long enough to know he was being forgotten. A voice came again from inside, clearer now, layered with something wet and broken. They prayed while I begged, it said. They sang while I bled. Margaret screamed. Silas dropped to his knees without realizing it, hands pressed to his ears like a child. "Make it stop," he sobbed. "For God's sake, make it stop." Elias turned toward him. "God did not bury him," he said. "You did." The chapel door burst open fully. Darkness spilled out, not rushing, not violent, but deliberate. It poured across the threshold and touched the ground like a shadow learning how to stand. Within it, a figure began to form. Not whole, not right. A man-shaped absence, edges blurred, chest sunken inward, as if the memory of breath still hurt. Where his face should have been, there was movement features trying to remember themselves. Thomas Reed stepped into the night. Jedediah Pike fell backward, scrambling through the dirt, like a man trying to escape his own reflection. "No, no, you were dead." Thomas's head tilted. His voice was layered now his own, and something beneath it, something older. "Dead men don't feel hunger," he said. "Dead men don't count the days." The ground beneath the chapel cracked softly. Elias felt it then, the deeper thing stirring, the thing Thomas had not been alone with. Because Thomas was not the only one buried. Silas looked up at Elias, eyes wild. "You cursed us." Elias shook his head. "No," he said. "I listened." Thomas turned his attention slowly toward the plantation house, toward the rows of cotton, toward the quarters. "I don't want them," Thomas said, voice trembling. "I want the ones who closed the door." The wind rose suddenly, whipping the moss into frantic motion. Somewhere in the distance, a horse screamed. Margaret backed away, heels catching in the dirt. "Silas," she gasped. "We have to leave. Now." Silas stared at Thomas, at the chapel, at the land beneath his feet, like it had betrayed him. "This is my home." Thomas took one step forward. "So was the ground," he said. The earth split beneath the chapel, with a sound like a bone snapping. From the widening crack, something deeper breathed. Elias turned his face toward it, heart heavy. This was only the beginning. Because Harrowick had buried more than one sin, and the land was done holding them. Panic did not explode at Harrowick. It spread. Like rot in damp wood, slow, inevitable, impossible to stop once it took hold. Silas Harrowick staggered back toward the house, boots slipping in the dirt, as if the land itself no longer recognized his weight. Margaret clutched his arm, her nails biting through fabric, her breath coming in thin, desperate pulls. "Inside," she hissed. "We need to be inside." Inside had always meant safety. Walls, locks, distance from the people who worked the fields and slept in the quarters. But tonight, even the house seemed to hesitate. Behind them, the chapel groaned, not collapsing, not yet but sagging, as though relieved to finally let go of what it had been forced to hold. The crack in the ground widened with a low, wet sound, and something warm breathed up from it, carrying the smell of old fear and damp stone. Thomas Reed stood still, half-formed, his shape wavering like heat above fire. He did not chase. He did not rush. He waited. That waiting frightened Silas more than rage ever could. Jedediah Pike scrambled to his feet and ran straight toward the house, past Silas and Margaret, past dignity, past command. His lantern fell, shattered, oil bleeding into the dirt like a wound that didn't know how to close. "You promised me," Jedediah shouted as he ran. "You said it was finished." No one answered him. The plantation house doors slammed shut. Bolted. Barred. From the outside, the house looked the same as it always had: white columns, tall windows, the symbol of power that had ruled this land for generations. From the inside, it sounded different. Wood popped, beams creaked. The house settled, not comfortably, but like something bracing itself. Alias remained where he was, standing between the quarters and the chapel, feeling the pull from both sides. He could sense the land the way others sensed weather pressure, imbalance, a storm waiting for permission. Old Cyrus stepped up beside him, leaning heavy on his cane. "You hear it too," the old man said. Elias nodded. "Yes." "It ain't just him," Cyrus murmured. "It's never just one." Thomas Reed turned his head slowly, as if hearing their voices from underwater. "I was not alone," he said, when they closed the door. The ground answered with a deeper sound movement. Not rising. Shifting. Like something rolling its shoulders after a long sleep. Lottie Mae pressed a hand to her mouth to keep from crying out. Caleb stood frozen, heart pounding so hard he thought it might betray him by sound alone. "What do we do?" Caleb whispered. Elias looked at him, not sharply this time, but with something like sorrow. "You survive," he said, "and you remember." Inside the house, Jedediah Pike burst into the main hall, breath ragged, sweat streaking his face. Servants scattered from his path, eyes wide, unsure whether to obey or flee. "Where's the master?" Jedediah barked. "In the study," someone stammered. "With the mistress." Jedediah didn't slow. He slammed into the study, nearly knocking over a chair. Silas stood near the fireplace, shaking, one hand braced against the mantel. Margaret hovered near the desk, her eyes darting to the windows, the walls, the floor. "We have to leave," Jedediah said. "Now. Tonight." Silas laughed, a short, broken sound. "Leave? This land is everything." Jedediah grabbed him by the collar. "That thing out there ain't done. You saw the ground. You heard it. This place is cursed." Margaret snapped. "Don't use that word." The floor beneath them creaked long, drawn out like the house itself had just shifted its weight. Jedediah froze. "Did you feel that?" he whispered. Another creak followed. Then another. The grandfather clock in the corner began to tick faster, the sound frantic, irregular. Margaret backed toward the wall. "Silas, the house has never sounded like this." Outside, the wind howled through the trees, bending them toward the house, as if the land itself were leaning in to listen. Thomas Reed took another step forward. With that step, the crack beneath the chapel widened into a shallow trench, and from it rose a sound not made by a throat, an echoing pressure, like many breaths taken at once. The enslaved people backed away instinctively, forming a wide circle, no one daring to cross the invisible line between the land and the house. Elias lifted his chin slightly. "This is where it decides," he murmured. Inside, the study windows rattled. One of them cracked clean across the glass. Silas dropped into a chair, hands trembling. "I didn't mean for this," he whispered. "I just wanted order." A voice came not from outside, not from the walls, but from beneath the floor. "You wanted silence." The boards under the rug bowed upward, just slightly. Margaret screamed. Jedediah stumbled back. "That's impossible." The voice continued, steady now, no longer weak. "You prayed over us," it said. "You sealed us in. You sang hymns so you wouldn't hear us." The fireplace flared suddenly, flames leaping too high, too wild. Silas sobbed. "We can fix this. We'll pay. We'll repent." The floor creaked again, closer this time. "No," the voice replied. "You will leave." Outside, Elias felt the decision settle like a final chord. The land had chosen. The house shuddered, not collapsing, but rejecting. Nails squealed. A portrait crashed from the wall inside. The sound carried across the yard like a declaration. Thomas Reed lifted his head toward the house, his form sharpening just enough to be unmistakable. "Go," he said. The front doors burst open. Silas and Margaret stumbled out first, carrying nothing but terror. Jedediah followed, pale and shaking, his authority stripped from him like flesh from bone. They did not look back. They ran, past the chapel, past the quarters, past the land that no longer wanted them. The ground beneath the house settled with a deep, satisfied sigh. The wind died. Silence returned, but not the suffocating silence of buried things. This silence was finished. Thomas Reed turned slowly toward Elias. "I am tired," he said. Elias nodded. "You may rest." Thomas stepped backward, dissolving into shadow, into soil, into memory. The crack in the ground eased, closing not as a wound, but as a mouth done speaking. Old Cyrus exhaled shakily. "They're gone." Elias looked toward the dark road where the masters had fled. "Yes," he said, "but the story is not. Because Harrowick stood empty now. And empty places never stay that way for long. Morning came to Harrowick without warmth. The sun rose, pale and thin, as if it had second thoughts about touching the land. Mist clung low to the ground, coiling around the empty plantation house and the broken chapel like breath that didn't belong to anyone alive. No bell rang. No overseer shouted. No whip cracked the air. For the first time in living memory, Harrowick stood without masters. The enslaved people did not celebrate. They did not sing. They moved cautiously, as one does after a storm, unsure which trees were still standing and which might fall if touched. Elias walked the ground slowly, barefoot, feeling where the earth had tightened and where it had loosened. The land felt calmer, not healed, but quieter, like a wound that had stopped bleeding and begun to scab. Caleb followed him at a distance, trying not to stare, failing anyway. "They won't stay gone," Caleb said finally. "Men like that don't." Elias nodded. "No," he said, "they will try to return." As if summoned by the thought, a low sound rolled across the road leading away from the plantation. Hooves, wheels, the clatter of iron. By noon, 3 riders appeared at the edge of the property line: Silas Harrowick, Jedediah Pike, and a stranger dressed in black. The stranger wore a long coat despite the heat and carried a leather-bound Bible pressed tight to his chest. His face was round, his mouth soft, but his eyes were sharp, restless. Reverend Amos Caldwell had returned with them. "They brought God," Lottie Mae whispered. Old Cyrus spat into the dirt. "They brought a man who uses God like a lock." The riders stopped short of the chapel ruins. Silas did not dismount. He stared at the cracked ground, the sagging boards, the place where Thomas Reed had stood. "This is madness," Silas muttered. "It can't hold." Reverend Caldwell slid down from his horse and surveyed the land with careful disgust. "Evil thrives where faith is weak," he said, "but it flees when named." Jedediah swallowed. "You didn't hear it like we did." Caldwell smiled faintly. "Fear has a voice," he said. "That doesn't make it truth." They advanced. The land did not welcome them. The closer they stepped, the heavier the air became. Horses snorted, refusing to move forward. One reared suddenly, nearly throwing Silas from the saddle. "Easy," Silas snapped, gripping the reins. "What's wrong with you?" The horse screamed. "Not avwin." A scream sharp and human enough to make blood run cold. Reverend Caldwell's smile faded. Elias stepped forward into view, standing between the quarters and the chapel remains. He did not raise his voice. "You should not come closer," he said. Jedediah pointed at him, hand shaking. "That's him. That's the one filling your head with nonsense." Caldwell's gaze settled on Elias with interest. "You are the mystic," he said, "the one whispering fear into weak hearts." Elias tilted his head slightly. "I listen," he replied. "Others speak." Caldwell opened his Bible. Scripture warns of men who consort with spirits. The ground shifted beneath his boots just a fraction. Enough. Caldwell froze. Silas's voice cracked. "Do something." Caldwell lifted his chin and began to pray aloud, his voice ringing across the yard. "Lord, cast out the darkness that has taken root in this place." The words died in his throat, because the chapel boards, those mismatched planks, lifted, not bursting, not breaking. They rose slowly, gently, as if something beneath them had placed both palms against the wood and pushed. A low murmur rolled up from the earth, not one voice, but many layered together, old and tired and patient. Caldwell staggered back. "This is blasphemy." Elias spoke quietly. "This is memory." Silas fell to his knees. "We're sorry," he sobbed. "We'll rebuild. We'll do better." The land answered him with silence. Then rejection. The front doors of the plantation house slammed shut on their own. Windows cracked. The porch rails split clean down the middle with a sound like snapping bone. Jedediah screamed and ran. Silas tried to follow but collapsed, clawing at the dirt as the ground beneath him hardened, refusing his weight. Caldwell dropped his Bible. Elias watched him carefully. "You cannot command what does not recognize you." The murmuring rose into a single sentence, spoken by no mouth and every mouth. "Leave it empty." Caldwell scrambled backward, pale and shaking. "This land is cursed." Elias shook his head. "It is finished." They fled again, this time faster, leaving horses, Bible, pride, and God behind. When they were gone, the house settled into stillness. The land exhaled. Caleb let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "It won't let them back." "No," Elias said, "it won't." Word spread quickly. Nearby plantations sent men to look, to test, to claim what had been abandoned. None crossed the boundary. Some said the air turned heavy. Some said they heard breathing beneath their feet. Some said they saw a man standing in the chapel ruins, watching, waiting. Soon, no one came at all. At night, the enslaved people gathered near the quarters, not to whisper in fear, but to listen. The land was quiet now, but not empty. Elias sat with them, saying little. He did not lead prayers. He did not promise miracles. He simply stayed. Lottie Mae watched him one evening as fireflies flickered like small, nervous souls. "What happens now?" she asked. Elias looked out across the dark fields. "Now," he said, "we live long enough to be remembered." In the distance, where the chapel had stood, the earth settled fully at last. No knock followed. No whisper. Just rest. But far away, on the road, Silas Harrowick rode without stopping, glancing back again and again, because some places do not chase you. They simply wait. And Harrowick would wait forever. Harrowick did not rot the way abandoned places usually do. It did not collapse inward. It did not become loud with animals or claimed by vines overnight. Instead, it hardened as if the land itself had drawn a boundary and dared the world to cross it. Weeks passed. No overseer returned. No master's whip split the air. No bell called anyone to prayer. Freedom did not arrive as joy. It arrived as uncertainty. The enslaved people stayed close to one another, moving through the days carefully, like survivors of a shipwreck afraid to trust the shore. They worked less, slept more, spoke in low voices that carried equal parts hope and fear. Because something protected Harrowick now, and protection always demands a price. Elias felt the change first. At night, when others slept, he woke to pressure behind his eyes, a deep, slow pull, like the tide turning beneath his bones. The land spoke less often, but when it did, it spoke directly to him. Not in words. In weight. In direction. In warning. Old Cyrus noticed the dark circles beneath Elias's eyes. "You ain't resting," he said one morning. Elias shook his head. "It does not let me." Cyrus nodded as if that answer made perfect sense. "That's the trouble with listening," he said. "Eventually, something expects you to answer back." The first outsiders arrived on a gray afternoon. 3 white men rode in from the north neighbors from a nearby plantation, smelling opportunity. They carried rifles and deeds folded in their coats, talking loudly, laughing too hard. "Abandoned land is free land," one of them said. They did not see Elias at first. They saw the house still standing, still proud. They crossed the boundary. The air changed immediately. One man stopped, frowning. "You feel that?" The ground beneath his boot softened just enough. He yelped and jumped back. Nothing visible had happened. That frightened them more than if something had. Elias stepped into view. "You should turn around," he said calmly. The men raised their rifles. "Who the hell are you?" one demanded. "I am the one who hears," Elias replied. They laughed. The laughter cut off abruptly when the ground behind them settled quietly, firmly closing the space they had crossed. The men fled. They did not come back. Word spread fast. They called Harrowick the closed plantation. They said it swallowed luck. They said dogs refused to hunt there. They said horses went mad at its edges. Some said a black mystic guarded it. Some said a dead man did. Most said nothing at all, because silence had teeth now. Within the quarters, life shifted in strange ways. People began to sleep deeper. Children cried less. The air felt lighter, except near the chapel ruins, where no one lingered unless Elias was present. Caleb stayed close to him, watching, learning in the only way he knew how. "You're not like them," Caleb said one night, sitting beside the dying fire. "Like who?" Elias asked. "The ones who use fear," Caleb said. "You don't scare the land, you don't command it." Elias stared into the embers. "No," he said. "I ask it what it remembers." "And it listens?" "It recognizes me." Caleb swallowed. "Why you?" Elias was quiet for a long time. Then, finally, "Because I was buried once too." Caleb looked at him sharply. "What?" "Not in the ground," Elias said, "but where voices are taken. Where names are stripped until only silence remains." He did not say more. He did not need to. That night, Elias dreamed of his homeland not as it was, but as it sounded. Drums beneath soil, voices carried through roots, ancestors who did not fade just because someone else wrote history differently. He woke with blood on his palm. Not fresh, old. The land was asking again. 2 days later, the church came. Not Caldwell. A different kind of men, cleaner, sharper, carrying papers stamped with authority. They said the state had heard rumors. They said abandoned land reverted to law. They did not ask permission. They brought chains. Elias stood in their path. "This place is not unguarded," he said. One man sneered. "Everything belongs to someone." The land answered. Not violently, decisively. The ground beneath the men's feet turned hard, unforgiving as iron. Their chains grew heavy, sinking into the soil like anchors. One man screamed as his leg twisted at a wrong angle, bone cracking under invisible pressure. They begged. The land did not respond. Elias raised his hand not to command, but to release. The pressure eased. "Go," he said, "and do not return." They left their chains behind. After that, no one came with papers. At night, Elias grew weaker. Lottie Mae noticed how he swayed when he stood too quickly. "You're paying for this," she said softly. "Yes," Elias replied. "What happens when it takes too much?" Elias looked toward the chapel ruins, where the earth lay smooth now closed, satisfied. Then someone else must listen. Caleb felt something cold bloom in his chest. "You mean me?" Elias met his eyes, not afraid, not reassuring. "Only if the land calls you," he said. One evening, as the sun sank red and heavy, Elias walked alone to the chapel site. He knelt and pressed his palm to the earth. "What do you want?" he whispered. The land answered, not with fear, not with anger, with release. The pressure lifted. Elias sagged forward, breath shaking. Behind him, old Cyrus watched from a distance, cane planted firm. "Rest," the old man murmured. "You done enough." The land did not argue. For the first time since Elias arrived, Harrowick slept without listening. But far beyond its boundaries, men spoke of reclaiming it, of fire, of force. And the land had not decided yet how much it would take to stay free. They came at dawn, not with curiosity, not with papers or prayers. They came with fire. 6 wagons rolled down the dirt road toward Harrowick, wheels creaking under the weight of oil barrels, torches bound tight with cloth, rifles resting easy in practiced hands. These were not men looking to claim land. These were men looking to erase it. Word had traveled too far. Fear had turned into rumor, and rumor into insult. Harrowick had become a challenge, an empty place that refused to stay conquered. Men do not forgive that. Elias felt them before he saw them. He woke with a sharp pain behind his eyes, breath knocked from his chest as if the earth itself had reached up and shaken him awake. The land was not whispering now. It was shouting. He rose slowly, joints stiff, bones heavy. Every step toward the clearing felt like walking against a current. Old Cyrus was already there, standing with his cane planted deep in the dirt like a marker. "They coming," he said, not fearfully, just certain. Caleb ran up behind Elias, chest heaving. "There's too many," he said. "They got fire." Elias nodded. "Yes. You can't stop all of them." Elias looked at him, then really looked at him, and Caleb felt the weight of that gaze settle into his bones. "I am not meant to," Elias said. The wagons stopped at the boundary. The men climbed down, boots heavy, faces hard. Their leader, a tall man with a scar like a hook along his jaw, stepped forward and spat into the dirt. "This is it?" he scoffed. "This cursed patch of nothing?" Elias stepped into view. The men lifted rifles instantly. The leader grinned. "There he is." Elias raised his hands not in surrender, but acknowledgement. "This land is closed," he said. The men laughed. The leader waved a torch. "We're opening it." The first torch flew. It landed in the grass near the chapel ruins. Nothing happened. The man frowned. Again. Another torch. Then another. The flames caught, but they burned wrong. Low. Slow. Like the fire was reluctant, unsure where to go. The land was resisting. The men grew angry. "Pour the oil," the leader snapped. Barrels tipped. Oil soaked into the earth like blood into cloth. Elias felt it then, the land's pain, sharp and immediate. It recoiled, not in fear, but in confusion. Fire was not meant for this. Elias dropped to his knees, palms pressed flat against the ground. "I will carry it," he whispered. Caleb rushed forward. "What are you doing?" Elias did not look up. Listening fully, the land surged. Not outward, inward. Elias gasped as something ancient and vast folded itself into him, not possession, not madness, but weight. Every buried scream, every sealed breath, every name taken and swallowed. His spine arched. Blood ran from his nose, dark against the dirt. The men hesitated. The leader frowned. "Shoot him." A rifle cracked. The bullet never reached Elias. The air thickened around him, pressure-bending sound and space. The shot fell dead to the ground, like it had forgotten how to move. The men backed away. "What the hell?" Elias rose slowly to his feet. When he looked up, his eyes were not glowing. They were deep, like holes cut into something older than light. "You cannot burn memory," Elias said. The torches flared violently, then extinguished all at once, smoke choking the air. The oil-soaked ground hardened, sealing itself, refusing the flame. The leader screamed in rage. "Light it again." They tried. Nothing burned. The land had chosen Elias as its mouth. Elias staggered forward, each step leaving a shallow impression that filled instantly behind him. "You came to cleanse," he said, "but you brought what you do not understand." The ground trembled, not splitting, not cracking, pressing. The men screamed as their boots sank inches into solid earth, panic ripping through them. "Let us go," one sobbed. Elias looked at them not cruelly, not kindly. "Leave," he said, "and do not return." The pressure released suddenly. Men fell, scrambling, crawling, abandoning wagons and fire alike. They fled without dignity, without argument. Silence returned. Elias collapsed. Caleb caught him just before he hit the ground. "Elias!" he shouted. Elias's breath was shallow. His skin felt cold. The land was withdrawing, taking back what it had lent. Old Cyrus knelt beside them. "It's done," he murmured, "but it took a piece." Elias smiled faintly. "It always does." Caleb shook his head desperately. "You can't leave. Not now." Elias's hand found Caleb's wrist, grip weak but steady. "You hear it," he whispered. "Caleb froze." "I do," Elias said. "Not yet, but soon." The chapel ruin stood untouched. The plantation house loomed empty. The land settled scarred, protected, awake. Elias closed his eyes. "I was never meant to stay," he murmured, "only to open the way." His breathing slowed, then stopped. The earth did not take him violently. It received him. The ground beneath him softened, just enough, folding him gently into itself. No grave, no marker, no seal. Just rest. Caleb screamed. But beneath his grief, he felt it. A pressure. A pull. The land had found its next listener. And far away, those who had fled Harrowick swore they would never return. Because some fires do not cleanse. They warn. Years passed. Not quickly, not gently, but they passed. Harrowick did not return to the world, the way abandoned places usually do. No ivy swallowed the house whole. No travelers stripped it board by board. No new master claimed it with ink and law. It remained, still standing, still watching. The road that once led to it thinned, then vanished beneath weeds. Maps stopped marking the plantation altogether. Children in nearby towns grew up hearing warnings instead of directions. "Don't go near the closed land," their parents said. "Don't ask what happened there." And yet stories survived where records failed. They said the house never rotted, but it never welcomed. They said the chapel ruins stayed warm in winter. They said fires would not take there, no matter how dry the summer. They said a young man sometimes walked the fields at dusk. Caleb Bryce did not leave Harrowick. He could have. Others did quietly, carefully, one by one, finding safer places, kinder soil, futures not weighed down by memory. But Caleb stayed. Not out of loyalty, out of responsibility. The land spoke to him now, not loudly, not cruelly, but persistently. Not in commands, not in threats. In reminders. He learned quickly that listening was not power, it was burden. At night, Caleb dreamed of Elias not as he had died, but as he had lived, standing barefoot in dirt, eyes closed, breathing in what others avoided. In the dreams, Elias never spoke. He only waited. Caleb woke, knowing what needed doing. He repaired fences not to keep people in, but to mark where the land ended. He guided lost travelers away without explanation. When men came with ambition or greed, the air grew heavy around them, and they turned back without knowing why. Caleb never told them to leave. He didn't have to. Old Cyrus lived long enough to see the legends grow. When he died, they buried him near the quarters, not beneath stone, but beneath oak roots, where he said the land would recognize him. Lottie May left eventually, taking children with her, carrying stories that did not sound like victory, but like warning wrapped in hope. Freedom, it turned out, was not loud. It was careful. Once a year, on the night Elias had walked into the earth, Caleb went alone to the chapel ruins. He brought no offerings. He spoke no prayers. He sat and listened. Sometimes the land was silent. Sometimes it remembered. On the 10th year, something changed. Caleb felt it at dawn, a shift so subtle most would have missed it. The pressure behind his eyes eased. The pull in his bones loosened. The land was no longer holding its breath. He walked the boundary and realized what had happened. The land no longer needed guarding. It had been accepted. Harrowick had passed from fear into legend, from legend into something quieter, something settled. That night, Caleb dreamed differently. He stood in the chapel as it once was, not sealed, not broken. Sunlight poured through wide windows. No boards hid the floor. Elias stood at the center, whole. "You did well," Elias said, not with voice, but with warmth. "I didn't command it," Caleb replied. Elias smiled. "You listened." Caleb woke with tears drying on his face. From that day forward, the land stopped speaking directly. It no longer needed a mouth. It had said what it came to say. Decades later, travelers claimed they saw a young boy standing at the edge of the old road, warning them away. Some swore they heard singing beneath the earth, not mourning, not rage. Remembrance. Harrowick became a place of avoidance, then a place of respect, and eventually, a place of quiet truth. Because the final lesson of Harrowick was never about curses. It was about memory. The masters fled not because a mystic threatened them, but because the land refused to forget what they had done. And land that remembers does not need violence. It only needs time. If you walk those fields now, you will feel nothing at first. Then if you are patient, you may feel it. A presence. Not watching. Not judging. Listening. And if you listen carefully enough, you might understand the final truth Elias carried with him across oceans and chains and silence. Some places do not belong to people. Some places belong to what happened there, and they will not let you leave until they have been heard.